The rain had been falling for 3 days straight and showed no signs of letting up anytime soon. Thomas McCarthy stood at the window of his ranch house watching the lightning crack across the darkening sky and thinking about all the years that had brought him to this moment. He was 58 years old now, and the ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations was struggling under debts he could no longer ignore. His wife Sarah had passed 2 winters ago, and since then the house had felt too large and too quiet. Their daughter Margaret lived back east with her own family now, and though she called every Sunday, it wasn't quite the same as having her there. Thomas had always been a proud man. His father had taught him that a man's word was his bond and that hard work could overcome any obstacle. But lately he had begun to wonder if some obstacles were simply too great. The bank had given him until the end of the month to catch up on his payments, and despite selling off most of his cattle, he was still coming up short. He had tried everything he could think of, took on extra work helping neighboring ranchers. But the drought last summer had hit everyone hard, and there simply wasn't much work to be found. He had considered selling parcels of land, but the thought of breaking up the ranch felt like betraying everything his father and grandfather had built. As he stood there lost in thought, he heard a sound that pulled him from his worries. It was faint at first almost, lost in the steady drumming of rain on the roof, but then he heard it again, a cry for help. Thomas grabbed his coat and hat and stepped out onto the porch. The rain immediately soaked through his clothes, but he barely noticed. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the sound. There it was again, coming from somewhere near the old barn. He hurried across the muddy yard, his boots splashing through puddles, and when he rounded the corner of the barn, he stopped short at what he saw. 2 young women were huddled together near the fence. They looked to be in their early 20s, and they were clearly in distress. Their clothes were torn and muddy, and even in the dim light, Thomas could see they were shivering from the cold. One of them was supporting the other, who seemed barely able to stand. "Help us, please." The stronger one called out when she saw him. "My sister is hurt and we have nowhere to go." Thomas didn't hesitate. He rushed over and helped support the injured girl, taking her weight on his shoulder. "Let's get you both inside," he said firmly. "We can sort everything else out once you're warm and dry." The walk back to the house was slow and difficult. The injured girl, whose name he would later learn was Emma, could barely put weight on her left leg. Her sister Clara kept apologizing over and over, saying they didn't mean to intrude, and they would leave as soon as the storm passed. Thomas just shook his head and focused on getting them safely inside. Once in the house, he settled Emma on the sofa and sent Clara to fetch blankets from the linen closet. He stoked the fire in the hearth until it was roaring, and then went to make hot tea. When he returned with 3 steaming mugs, Clara had wrapped her sister in blankets and was holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. Thomas set the tea on the table and then excused himself to find some dry clothes they could change into. He brought out some of Margaret's old things that she had left behind when she moved away. They would be a bit large on these girls, but at least they would be warm and dry. While the sisters changed in the spare bedroom, Thomas tried to piece together what might have happened. The storm had driven them here, that much was clear, but there was more to their story. When they emerged, dressed in oversized sweaters and wool socks, Thomas gestured for them to sit by the fire. "Now then," he said gently, "tell me what happened." Clara looked at her sister, and then back at Thomas. Her eyes were red from crying, and her voice shook as she spoke. "We were traveling to meet our brother in the next county," she began. "He had found work there and sent for us, but our wagon broke down about 5 miles back." She paused to take a sip of tea, her hands trembling around the mug. "We tried to fix it, but the wheel was too damaged, and then the storm came and we had to leave everything behind and just walk." Emma picked up the story, her voice weak but steady. "I twisted my ankle badly when we were climbing over a fence trying to find shelter, and I told Clara to go on without me, but she wouldn't leave me." "Of course I wouldn't," Clara said fiercely, squeezing her sister's hand. "We're family." Thomas nodded, understanding completely what that meant. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "Both of you need rest, and that ankle needs to be looked at properly." He stood and went to the kitchen, returning with a basin of cool water and some clean cloths. "I'm no doctor, but I've wrapped enough sprained ankles in my time to know the basics." As he gently examined Emma's ankle, which was badly swollen and bruised, he learned more about the sisters. They had lost their parents the previous year to illness and had been living with an aunt who had recently remarried. The new husband hadn't wanted them there and had made their lives difficult until finally their brother had sent for them. "We saved every penny we could," Clara explained, "bought that old wagon and our few belongings and set out 3 days ago. And now everything we own is sitting in that broken wagon somewhere in the rain." Emma added with a sad smile. Thomas wrapped Emma's ankle carefully and then sat back considering. "The wagon can be retrieved once the storm passes," he said, "and if the wheel is broken, I have tools here that might fix it." The sisters looked at each other with hope flickering in their eyes. "We couldn't ask you to do that," Clara said quickly. "You've already done so much." "You're not asking," Thomas replied. "I'm offering." Over the next few days, as the storm continued, the 3 of them fell into an easy routine. Emma rested on the sofa, her ankle propped up, while Clara helped Thomas with chores around the house. She insisted on earning their keep, and though Thomas protested at first, he found himself grateful for the company. The house that had been so quiet and empty for 2 years suddenly felt alive again. Clara reminded him of Margaret at that age. She had the same determined spirit, the same kindness. In her eyes, she told stories about growing up with her siblings, and Thomas found himself sharing memories of Sarah, and Margaret. Emma was quieter, but she had a gentle wisdom about her. As she recovered, she would sit by the fire mending Thomas's old shirts without being asked and offering thoughtful observations about life. "You know," she said one evening as they all sat around the fire, "our mother used to say that kindness is never wasted even when it seems like the smallest gesture." Thomas stared into the flames, thinking about that. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman," he said softly. When the storm finally broke, Thomas went out with Clara to retrieve their wagon. They found it right where the sisters had left it, the wheel, broken beyond simple repair, but Thomas had an old wheel in his barn that with some adjustments would fit. They spent the afternoon working on it, and by evening the wagon was as good as new. That night at dinner, Clara brought up something that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Thomas," she began hesitantly, "Emma and I have been talking, and we have a proposition for you." Thomas set down his fork and listened. "We know you've been struggling," Clara continued. "We've seen the letters from the bank on your desk, and we want to help." "Now hold on," Thomas started, but Emma interrupted gently. "Please let us finish," she said. "We have the money our brother sent for our journey, and a bit more we had saved. It's not much," Clara added quickly, "but it might be enough to help with what you owe." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "I can't take your money," he said firmly. "You need that to get to your brother to start your new life." "But you gave us our lives back," Emma said. "If you hadn't found us in that storm, I don't know what would have happened." "Anyone would have done the same," Thomas protested. "But anyone didn't," Clara said. "You did, and you asked for nothing in return, and you've treated us like family." The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Thomas looked at these 2 young women who had stumbled into his life just days ago and felt something shift in his chest. It was the same feeling he had gotten when Sarah had first told him she was pregnant, with Margaret a sense that everything was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. "I have a different idea," he said slowly, the words forming even as he spoke them. "What if instead of going to your brother right away, you stayed here for a while?" The sisters looked at each other in surprise. "This house is too big for one person," Thomas continued, "and the ranch needs more hands than just mine, and you both have already proven you're hard workers. But what about our brother?" Emma asked. "Write to him," Thomas suggested. "Tell him you've found good work and a safe place to stay, and when spring comes, if you want to move on to be with him, I'll make sure you get there safely with enough money saved to start fresh." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that for us?" "I'd be honored," Thomas said, and he meant it with his whole heart. That night, Thomas sat down and wrote a letter to Margaret. He told her about the sisters and how they had come into his life when he needed them most. He told her about his idea and how having them at the ranch had made him remember what it felt like to have family around. He didn't mention the debt or the bank or his struggles. Instead, he focused on the unexpected gift of companionship and purpose that Clara and Emma had brought with them. Margaret's response came 2 weeks later. She was delighted by the news and told him she had always worried about him being alone. She also mentioned something he hadn't explained.